So continuing with the discussion of secondary data, we're going to talk a little bit here about the sources of secondary data. And I'm going to begin with one of the most ready sources, which is administrative record data that's produced. And this includes administrative data that's produced by individual organizations, and it's part of their like records of a school system on its students, or records um, of a business organization on its employees. Most organizations produce data on a regular basis for administrative purposes, but that data can be used for research. So that can be sort of within an individual institution. Most universities, for example, have an office of institutional research that has its as its primary job really the analysis of its own kind of administrative data. But also governments around the world also have administrative data, and much of that data is made more publicly available. And some good examples of that in the United States include things like the Vital Statistics Reporting System, which is basically all the county and local health departments that record births, issue birth certificates and death certificates. They're encouraged to participate in a nationwide uniform reporting system where the vital statistics are contributed to a nationwide system. And most countries, other countries are more centralized than the United States and do the recording of birth and death certificates in a more standardized way. But in, regardless in whether it's a federal system or a more unified system of government, the birth and death statistics are fairly consistently coded and submitted into a central database, and that becomes very valuable data for studying the demographic trends of the population, the nature of births, the number of births, the infant mortality rate, the racial distribution of births in the country. And then for the death records provide things like the life expectancy is calculated from death certificates. Certain causes of mortality are tracked through death records, and so that's a good example. Those are collected for administrative purposes, but they're very important statistics for health and demographic research. And then another good example is the crime reporting. There are many police agencies all around the United States, city, county, state police, university police. They Most of those agencies contribute to a uniform reporting of crime reports. So people make complaints. I was robbed. Someone beat me up. When people call in to report a murder or whatever, there are crime reports, and those reports are standardized and submitted to a data collection program, which is supervised by the FBI and produces what's called the Uniform Crime Reports, which is a major and important data set for tracking trends in violent and property crime all around the United States, and looking at differences in crime rates, and it's a major source of data for research on criminal justice issues. So that's just a bit of an overview of administrative data. There's a great deal of administrative data, and it can be used by you and by researchers. You'll see it in studies, in reports, where these sorts of statistics and this kind of data is the basis of the study. Now, the other major form of secondary data that we're going to focus on here is the public use microdata. So we mentioned what microdata is. Microdata is the data at the most micro level, usually meaning the individual respondent, the individual person or household, and that data is increasingly being made available publicly. So this is data that's usually collected by government statistical programs and statistical agencies, but also nonprofit and international and even some private research organizations do, like Pew, for example. Well, Pew, I guess, is nonprofit, but they make their data publicly available. There's survey data, but this includes things like the current population survey, which is, is one of the largest surveys in the United States, produced by the Bureau of the Labor Statistics. There's the behavioral risk factor surveillance survey, health surveys, education surveys, and the individual data is being made publicly available. And that's partly because these agencies spend a lot of money collecting the data. It's public money. They spend public money collecting the data. And in some ways, it's a valuable resource. And it's for researchers outside of government. And if society is going to spend the resources collecting this data, and it's of value to researchers and advocates or think tanks to use this data, then it's an important public service to make it available, and that all of that now is much easier than it used to be. I mean, those of you who are younger probably take it for granted, but these data sets used to be only accessible in a more closed format. You had to send away for the CD or DVD of the data, or you had to make some special request to have the data mailed to you. Now they're mostly available on websites. You can download the data. You can even analyze it online, and we'll take a look at that shortly. Now, something to take away from this week is that one thing I really want all of you to think about is, what are the major surveys in your field? So if you're interested in health, for example, there are many different important health surveys, and you should think about the health issues that you're interested in and where the important findings about those issues come from, and what surveys do they come from. And then get to know those surveys. What agency produces the data? Where's the website where this data is made available? How can I personally access the data? What can I do with the data? Or if same thing in education or in criminal justice, or in labor force, employment and poverty issues and all that. So the thing to know is, in your field, where do the major statistics come from? Where do the major trends and findings come from? What surveys produce those? And get to know those surveys. And that's helpful in two ways. One, it helps you understand the evidence that emerges in your field and where it comes from, and the limitations and strengths and weaknesses of the evidence that appears on something, let's say like childhood obesity, or crime victimization, or whatever. So that's one reason, just to be aware of where the findings come from. The second reason is that you can access that data. There are, because of the publicly available nature of much of this microdata, you can use it yourself to do analysis. And that's what we're going to take a look at, how that's done. And I'm going to give you a quick little demonstration of it. Okay, so how do we access data? So you can access this public use microdata. Usually there's two sort of broad ways to access it. One is sort of the offline way of accessing it, which is downloading the data, usually in a statistical software format like Stata or SPSS or SAS. You download the data file, and importantly, you need the documentation to go along with the data, because the data itself are just columns and rows of numbers, and it won't make any sense unless you have the documentation for it. And then you analyze it offline. So now this is sort of allows for a much more full control of the analysis. This is what big research teams would do if they use something like the current population survey to analyze some kind of employment or labor force issue. They would download the tens of thousands of individual observations, download it to their computer. They'd use Stata or SAS or SPSS to kind of open the data file, and they do some analysis, regression analysis or whatever, and that's one mode of doing it. Now that's often the preferred method, especially for more complex or involved projects. But it takes a lot of time and effort in a way to access the microdata that way, and increasingly statistical agencies and data programs are making the microdata available in easier and more rapidly accessible format through what are called online data analysis tools. So these are tools that allow for quick access to custom results. So they actually do connect. These are web-based analytical tools that connect to the microdata, and so they allow all kinds of custom analysis. And they have the important advantage, in addition to being quick, that they help people avoid mistakes with some of the complicated things that could come up with trying to do offline analysis, which is you need to know how to properly weight the data, how to handle missing codes in the data, how to compute variables, and that sort of thing.